Well, in my videos, I've very often expressed my disdain for democracy, for the idea that not only that we can derive normative and ethical conclusions based on some kind of majority voting, but that those scenarios even give us systems that have utilitarian value, because they evidently do not. And one of the people on my comments basically dismissed all this because we have representative government, and so that in effect nullifies, my critiques of what they interpreted as being direct democracy only. And I will agree that what I said applied directly to direct democracy, but every critique I might make or anyone could make about direct democracy is applicable to representative democracy, and then there's at least one or two other problems with representative democracy in addition to those of direct democracy. A quick recap here. One, these are good. First, I'm going to relist for I don't know how many times problems with direct democracy. And these are problems that both put into question any claim that democracy is for the collective good or the common good, and also that the decisions reached via this method are, valid on utilitarian grounds. Sorry, I just don't want to sit down right now. And I have to do videos in the bathroom because it's too loud everywhere else. Sorry. Number one problem, and I always point this out because I've never heard anyone mention it besides me. I have a whole video on it, though. I'm sure others have thought about it, is the gerrymandering problem. We can get any answer, any outcome we desire simply by defining the electorate a certain way. If I define the electorate as only my anarchist buddies, then we have anarchy right now. It will win every vote. If we define it having only socialists, we'd have socialism. If we define it, and this is not a hypothetical problem. In fact, the term gerrymandering, that only exists because it is a practice that is not only common, but there isn't a single district in the entire United States that this hasn't been subject to unless there's been a law against it. There's sometimes in municipals, like a state will say, hey, the county is the county, and that's it. But in congressional districts, this just happens all the time. I know in the UK, it's more than 80% of the districts are what they call safe, meaning the incumbents of whatever particular party has it will win every single time. And majorities or minorities in parliament are based on that 15 to 20%, where try as they might, they cannot get a majority to win every single time. This will slowly change over time. There might be, or if there's a big disaster, I know, like right after Watergate, a lot of districts that had been safe for Republicans for a long, long, long time went to the Democrats, like Justin Amash's district. The last time it went to a Democrat was the election immediately after Watergate. But they actively gerrymander, and actually they gerrymander to get rid of people. Ron Paul and Justin Amash, my two favorite congressmen, have both been gerrymandered against by their own parties. Ron Paul's Republican Party has attempted to get rid of him on numerous occasions by gerrymandering, and Justin Amash, his district has just been changed, which is interesting because Michigan is a totally Republican governor, Republican House, Republican Senate, but they don't like Amash. Why? Because he is his own man, he has principles, he is not a party hack. I mean, he is a Republican, he'll say nice things about Republicans, but if there's a bill they want to pass and he thinks it's unconstitutional, he will vote no. Absolutely he will. And they don't care. They want their own political power, and so they are giving him a big liberal district, and they would rather they have a Democrat there than him, literally. He's too principled to say anything about it, but that's what happened. And whether you like their politics or not, the point is that the politicians use the power to define the electoral districts to their advantage. And that is not a unique, unusual, or occurrence. That is typical. That is normative, actually. It's what they almost always do. So there's the gerrymandering problem. There's also the rational ignorance problem. Nobody, the number of things the government is involved in is so huge that for someone to come to an informed opinion about even a single one of them would be very difficult. And there are actually people who attempt to do this. There are people who like to study and who like to really think about all the issues. But at the end of the day, their vote only counts for a tiny, tiny bit. It depends on the electorate and how much. Voting for president, you're talking about in the millions and millions, even if you're only counting the Electoral College. If you're talking about a congressional district, it's in the hundreds of thousands, although usually only tens of thousands of people vote. Anyway, you might spend a lot of time reading, Barack Obama's autobiography and his biography and books about him and about his opponent, and researching his strategies in economics and healthcare and national defense and blah, 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 and you could literally spend a lifetime. I mean, I know politicos who spend a lifetime thinking about this stuff, and then they're going to go and you're going to vote based on all that, and 1,000 other people are going to vote because of party affiliation, or they like the way they look, or because they gave a good singer at the debate, or because they had a nice hot dog stand and they were giving away free food or free t-shirts or whatever, and your vote is just gone. And the point of that is that it doesn't make sense then to spend a lot of time thinking about it, which just kind of reinforces the problem where everybody, and even if a lot of people say, well, this is an argument for like education or whatever, but since we're not in a direct democracy, decision making is insulated by your votes by just that much more. And so even if you really pick exactly, even if you really come down to it and you can, in some very scientific, defensible, logical way, pick Obama over McCain, he could just renege on everything that you thought he was going to do, and you can't do anything about it. You already elected him. And so even if you are really knowledgeable, it doesn't matter. You're going to be stuck with him. And so there's that. There's the demagoguery problem. Basically, the whole idea, the premise, the egalitarian pretension behind voting is that, one vote, one person. I made a video almost a year ago now called one person, one vote equals bullshit. That's exactly right, because we all know that there are voting blocks. Whenever we have parliaments or whatever, they form immediately. They usually take the name of political parties. In the olden days, like in Rome and Byzantium, they were parties, but they were based on colors, actually, people who rooted for chariot teams. We have political parties. But more than that, there's influence. So if certain radio hosts, say Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity, endorses a candidate, there's just lots of people, millions actually, who are going to follow that. I always joke that if Noam Chomsky says something, Noam Chomsky is someone I have mixed opinions about. He's pretty good on Israel and foreign policy. He's pretty bad when it comes to economics and politics. But a lot of left-wing people basically take his word as gospel, which is ironic. He was right. He's supposed to be egalitarian. But if he decides to vote one way, then we know that a lot of liberals and progressives are just going to defer to his opinion, and then so the concept of one person, one vote is just kind of silly in that situation, because whatever he votes, they're gonna follow. Of course, there are also corruption problems. These are, everyone knows about them, and the only argument I hear against them is just to say that they don't happen that much. These, of course, are the ideas that they don't really count the votes, that dead people vote, that it's voter fraud, that sort of thing. And the bottom, it's correct that we don't know how often this happens, other than the reported cases that are confirmed are the minimum, because sometimes it happens and we don't know. I really could not tell you how much I think this happens in the United States. I know it happens in every election. At least I highly, highly think it happens in every election. Also, there's just the possibility of mistakes being made. And this kind of also casts a lot of doubt onto, the will of the people. What if the will of the people is just a whole bunch of dead people voted? I mean, John F. Kennedy, this is pretty well known, was elected by dead people in Chicago. If he had not won the city of Chicago, he would have lost the race. And lots of pets and dead people voted for him. And that's, I'm not going to say that if you're going to make an edifice of this perfect system or a nearly perfect system or a system that can't really be questioned anyway, then that's a flaw. That's a pretty big flaw. Say, hey, whatever the democracy does is normative. So there's all those. There's probably more I haven't even thought about, but representative democracy adds another layer to that. One I've already kind of talked about, but just real quick, if you think about it, the commenter said they represent the will of society. Let's just assume there is such a thing as the will of society, which is not definite, it's not scientific, and it's whatever. I don't believe in such a thing, but assume that there was. To have something that merely represents it means that representation is not exact. That there is some informational loss, some aspect of its being is excluded or distorted in the representation. So we can have me, the real me, but video is not the real me. And the YouTube screen that you're watching it's a representation of me, but it's not the whole me. It's actually only a tiny fraction. You're only seeing my face, and it's two-dimensional, and you don't see all my surroundings, and you don't understand what's going on in my mind and all that. It's just a representation of me, and a very poor one. And so even if we accepted that there's some society at large, the representatives, even if they wanted to, would only be, a pale imitation of that. And so their legitimacy would be likewise diminished. But the second thing is the concept of representative is actually kind of a difficult one in the case of politics. It's something that's perfectly acceptable and understandable and logical in a market society, or at least in certain circumstances within a market society. I could, for instance, I work for months at a time, a long way from home, and I could say, listen, I want my affairs taken care of back home. I want my dog let out and fed. I want my house maintained. I want errands and whatever. And I could go to a friend of mine and I could say, listen, I'd like you to do this, and you'd be my representative. We'd come to an agreement. I'll pay him. Maybe I'll just let him live in my house while I'm gone, whatever. And he could be my representative, and we could speak of his representation of my interests. And it would also be very, very clear if he violated that and ceased to be my representative, if he started, say, stealing from me, or if he killed my pet, or if he failed to maintain the house as agreed, then we would know very clearly and obviously, there'd be no question that they had reneged or failed in their dispensation or their mandate, so to speak, to represent me. What if, however, two people hired him, the same person, to be their representatives, and we had different houses? Well, as the saying goes, you cannot serve two masters. He may well wish to help us both. He wants to get paid by both of us, obviously. But at any given moment, he can't be serving both of our interests. And in those interims, while he's maybe mowing my friend's lawn, then he can't be honestly said to be at that time looking after my interests or being my representative. He's being my friend's representative at that point. And he could switch, and it's becomes kind of impractical or implausible. But then it also becomes difficult, because then I could say, well, listen, you're not following my interests because you're over the other person's house. And he could say, well, I'm their representative. Well, if they're their representative, then you're not mine in that situation. And this becomes really egregious when we have mutually exclusive goals. Say, I tell him that, hey, my buddy, one of my friends, he owns a car, he has it for sale, I would like you to, as my representative, to purchase it. But then the other party tells him the same thing, is I want that same car. He cannot represent both of our interests then. He will have to choose one or the other. And this is the dilemma, the intractable dilemma that all representatives face. Even assuming that they want to fulfill their role as a representative, it is literally not possible, because there are mutually exclusive, contradictory interests within society, and because of that, they cannot be acting to serve the will of any particular person at all, not one, let alone some aggregation thereof. If people have differing interests, mutually exclusive ones, for instance, land use is a common one. This is one that actually happens on a fairly regular basis. It's not super dramatic, but it actually is kind of a tragedy when we talk about like eminent domain. This happened in Detroit in the 80s, actually. General Motors, government motors nowadays, this is before they went bankrupt totally. They wanted a huge section of land in Detroit, in the city, to build a factory. And they either lacked the means or the desire to buy all this land from they had hundreds of owners. It was mostly residential, but there were a few businesses as well, little shops and stuff. And they basically got the city to take it. They said they made an argument, and the city would be better off, and so the legislature passed a law, and they took all that land. And then the factory never, they lied. They said they'd employ 20,000 people, and they employed 6,000 people, and I think it actually closed after a while. But the point is, whose interests were being represented there? General Motors or the people? And obviously General Motors was. And so no government official involved in that could said to have been representing the people, obviously. They were representing General Motors. And actually, not to sound like a socialist, but this is the kind of pattern that you're going to see, is there's going to be a deference and a tendency to support corporations and rich people and the politically connected to the exclusion or at the expense of the poor, which is interesting because we're always being told how, we need a state because of the poor people and for their sake, and because they can't fend for themselves, and the rapacious corporations will exploit them. And the evidence is to the contrary. The state is not a knight to protect. And people say, it's going to corrupt. That's a corrupted state. Well, it's always how it is. And I use this example, but every eminent domain decision is basically like that. Every time they tell one person, a farmer, that they have to lose their land to build a road, they're not representing their interests. They're representing the interests of some other entity who exactly is not clear, because they're differing interests. Now, the other problem here is a practical one. To me, that's it. There's no such thing as a concerted, centralized, unified interest. If there was, it would make sense. If there was an objective ethic, and we could say, look, this is exactly the best thing right here, there's no question, then they could pursue that. But there is no such edifice on which to justify their tyranny, basically. But in effect, representatives don't even attempt to make a judgment of what the populace really wants. They can look at polls, but those aren't very exact. Those can be misleading, and they only sample a certain part of the population at any given time. They can have town hall meetings, but whoever even shows up to those, you might get a lot of people, but they will be a self-selecting group. And even if you listen to their testimony, it's not always going to be clear what they all want, nor is it clear how their interests reflect the interests of others. They have contradictory interests. Obviously, you can't select them all. You're going to be getting emails and phone calls. How much that they agree to them is... in my experience, when I've written to or called congressional people, the number one response that I can characterize what I hear back is basically they give a generic response that indicates they were not even paying the least bit of attention to what you said. Because I've written letters about things, and the response is not even about that at all, which should tell you how much they care what you think. I will reference one of my second favorite congressman is Justin Amash. He's in the district directly south of mine. I'd love to say he was my congressman. He's not, but he's close. And he is unique in the United States, maybe in world history, where he will literally justify every single vote he ever takes in real time on Facebook. He did that when he was in the State House, and he does that in Congress. Every time there's a vote, he votes on it. I think he's missed one or two. Or no, he didn't miss any, actually, this first. He literally voted every single time. It was more than 1,000 votes. And every time he would vote what he voted, and he would put some reason as to why. And this is unique. No one's ever done that before. And he would even allow comments, and people would comment, and they let him know what he thinks. And he does read the comments. I don't know if he can literally read them all, because he's getting to the point now where he'll get thousands of comments. But he will respond to some of them, and he usually will respond to his critics. But that's a unique guy. But even that, who's he represent? I think he's great, but I know people in his district who hate his guts. So who is he representing? Who is he working for? Now he has his own. And this is what they all have. He has his own personal idea of what government should be. Now his is a principled one. His is a minarchist one, although he's got a Murray Rothbard picture on his wall. But that's not everyone else's vision, and so it can't really be said, he's representing them. He's representing his own philosophy. And the do-good socialists, if you are out there and you believe in do-good socialism, well, that's just a happy coincidence for you that the politician is supporting that to one degree or another, although almost certainly not in the exact way or manner that you might like. But that does not prove that he's serving the interests of everybody, because you have to admit, no matter how much you may think it's justified, that there are people who disagree with you, either totally or at least in some degree. Most Canadians want universal health care, but they probably differ in exactly how they think it should be provided. To what degree the provinces or the federal, or, the number of issues is astronomical. And so, because the government does something, we take we take a poll and says everybody wants a car, or the majority of people, the vast majority, want a car. That doesn't mean that anything the government then does that could plausibly be linked to cars is the common good. They could say, we're going to give everybody a car, and there could be some crappy, junky car that most people don't want. There might be some poor people who are happy with it. There may be other people who say this isn't worth the money that went into it. So, there's a tendency to give way too much leeway and just say they did something on an issue that some people care about in some way, hence they're fulfilling that's not hyperbole. That's an accurate description of when they do things that are popular. That's not rigorous. That's not scientific. It's not convincing. The representatives in practice. Oh, here's the other thing about when you vote for, and I've mentioned this in the previous videos. When you vote for a representative, there is no way for them to know, even if they cared to find out, why you voted for them. Example here, obviously, someone like Obama. A lot of people voted for him because they believe he's a great man and they love him. A lot of people voted for him because they didn't want John McCain to be president, which I thought, I didn't vote, but if I had, that would have been the reason why. Some people vote because they want him to do specified things. They think he's going to do X, Y, and Z, and they want him to do X, Y, and Z, and so they vote for him on the condition that they do that. And some people vote for him because they want him to do whatever he wants, and they just want him to be doing it. Well, when you count up the votes, there's no way to go and say, okay, well, this is what people want. his promises to do the things, the people who voted for him to do X, Y, and Z, he's violated most of those promises, especially when it comes to civil liberties and war. But we don't know how many people voted him for that reason. He could plausibly completely deny. He doesn't have to, his promises and pretensions to the contrary are totally irrelevant. He can do whatever he wants, basically. Oh, my phone's ringing. Hello? What's up? How do you think it's going? Well, I don't know. They haven't done anything. They sped up, so they're going 1.1 feet per hour now. Yeah. And Payson was off for a while, but then it came on. It wasn't us. They were just doing maintenance. Yep, you're correct. Nothing. I mean, as far as I can tell, yeah. Okay, that's good. I don't know. They got to go like 20 or 30 feet. It's going to take another day, but I don't know how far they're going to go. So, yeah, I haven't done anything yet. So, we'll see. I'll go out to eat when I get done. I'm going to go to Staples and Lowe's, get those screws and stuff, and get out here. Alright, sounds like a plan. Bye-bye. While you're out here, I'm not going to edit that out. Sorry. My coworker, Colleen, calls every day just to ask what's up. I think he just wants to find out if he's going to have to work or not. He may tonight, first time in a couple of days. Anyway, I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, they don't know why it is anyone voted for them. In practice, there's two things. There's only two justifications or references to their voting, how they got elected, that I've ever seen politicians use. One is that they'll say, I promised to do this, that's why they voted for me, and so I'm going to do it. It's actually difficult to know. They may have made the promise, but that's not necessarily then why people voted for them. But that is interesting. That's some kind of attempt to kind of couch it as a form of a contract. That is, however, an extremely rare event, and even when a politician does some of the things they promise, they will often do only a few of them. They'll make, they're politicians, they'll make literally tens of thousands of promises. Okay, maybe I shouldn't say that many. They'll make a lot, they'll only even attempt to do a few. But in general, most of the time, what they'd simply say is that the fact that they got the majority of some electorate, which is, by the way, almost never a majority of the population, is a mandate to do whatever they want. That they have been given authority to govern or rule, in effect, in any way that they desire, and that they have the stamp of democracy with which to do that. It's literally like a mandate of heaven. Before we used to say the God or the gods have declared it as such. Now we say the electorate has, although the government controls the electorate, they count the ballots, they regulate access to the ballots, they regulate who can vote in what districts, and they demonstrably rig these for at least their party affiliations' benefit. And so I don't think that we should put too much stock in their sincerity, that they're even attempting to fulfill some kind of notion of the collective good. That their actions demonstrate that they are acting for their own benefit. And I know, again, it doesn't have to be the most extreme examples of graft. Most politicians that I've met, that I've known, and I've known a few at the state and the federal level, they're not Hitlers or Stalins. They just want to be popular. They want to be the center of attention, and they like the idea. They like the idea of being in government and having that as a feather in their cap. Which that's not evil to think that way, but it's also not exactly an encouraging way to govern or to run society, which is what they're doing. And in that capacity, they don't spend a great deal of time agonizing over what the people want or what's best for the people. They agonize over what's going to make them popular, which is not the same thing. What's going to make them politically powerful, which is often a very different thing. That's why Amash is getting gerrymandered out, because he won't make them politically powerful. It's actually quite unusual for somebody like that to be in. Ron Paul is exceptional in that sense, so is Amash, and they're not the only two, but they're pretty close to the only two. They're there to go to cocktail parties, to be the toast of the town, to have their name in the newspaper. These aren't evil things, these aren't Hitlerian things, but the effects is, I mean, if that's their motivation, how are they going to know how to manage the roads? Forget genocide and Holocaust. How are they going to know how to manage education? They don't. They're going to be passing laws about what kind of drugs children should take, what kind of health insurance we should get, but they're more concerned about what kind of new car they're going to get, how their wife is going to dress at the new party that the president's putting on, or whatever socialite they want to deal with. Or, you know, it's not always obviously vain things, but it's also not anything that, they're not philosophers. They're not philosopher kings, you know. Even if they were, they wouldn't have the knowledge to rule, but there's no pretense that that's even what they're attempting to do. They're just popular guys, and they're not even that popular. They're popular among those who vote. And there's also a lot of evidence. I have this from firsthand, people, but it makes perfect sense. There's a vast government bureaucracy, and basically that bureaucracy can make or break a lot of these politicians in any number of ways through their contributions to them, among others. And they want them to keep the gravy train open. There's a whole vested interest of people say, hey, you want to get reelected, you like to be the toast of the town, that's fine. Here's $5,000 when the bill comes to vote for us. And it's so, people, I don't know how anyone could accuse me of being cynical for saying that, because that's how almost the vast majority of them work every time. So the battery's going to die. Representative democracy is fucking bullshit, people. Fucking bullshit. Oh, fuck. I didn't turn it off yet.